I sometimes really feel that I don't do anything. I like that creative innovation chaos. Even if you find it easier to come up with a solution, ask instead of tell. Maybe, I hope they look at me and say, well, she must know something.
If you've ever wondered whether your non-linear career is a strength or a liability, or if you've struggled with the feeling that as a leader you're no longer doing anything, this episode is for you. My guest today is Lidia Oshlyansky. She started out as a social worker, became a back-end engineer, fell in love with UX and product, and eventually ended up leading teams of over 100 people. She's worked at Google, Spotify, Nokia, and fast-moving startups, as well as a number of traditional companies. We talk about that transition from making things yourself to empowering others, and how to stay grounded when you feel like there's nothing to show for your work. We also talk about how to build real partnerships across functions, especially with design and engineering. What happened when a senior colleague said, "I still don't know what the hell you do," and how she decides which problems are worth solving and which ones to leave on the table. It's a generous, wise, and deeply human conversation, and one of my favorites so far. Let's dive in as Lidia tells the story of how she got started in product.
I studied psychology. I was a social worker for almost 5 years. Social work was really difficult and emotionally draining, and I decided to go back to university for computer science because then I could stare at screens instead of trying to help people that I couldn't actually really help because it's really hard work. So I did. I went back to DePaul University in Chicago and did a certification in computer science, and I was actually a back-end engineer for a few years. And then I transitioned into what back then was a business analyst or a business architect, which has a lot of the skill set and the tasks or the mandates that a modern product manager would have. From there, I discovered human-computer interaction, which is almost the academic side of UX, product design. Fell in love with the topic, did a master's, convinced myself I needed a PhD, went to do a PhD in the topic.
Where was that, in the US? Or?
No, so my master's is also from DePaul University in Chicago. My PhD is actually from the UK. I started at UCL and then I finished at the University of Wales in Swansea.
So it sounds like you weren't sort of like thinking from the start, I'd like to be leading product or designing things. It was more like a exploration.
It was an exploration. I enjoyed working as a hands-on designer, which I did for many years. I enjoyed working as a UX researcher, which I did for many years. I've managed designers, I've managed researchers, I've even managed engineers. I think it was this combination of kind of understanding where tech was coming from, even though I've never programmed or engineered in a modern stack, right? When I was an engineer, we were working on mainframes and Oracle databases. All of which seems so far away right now. But at least it's understanding the complexity of that, but also understanding sort of the UX and design side, and really always being very business oriented because you need to make money from what you build. So bringing those things together. So again, having worked as like a business analyst, business architect, as it used to be called, right? I mean, it was kind of your job to make sure that things got built to, I apologize for this verbiage, specification. Oh my goodness. So all of those things just sort of started converging, especially as I went into the management side of a career, and they continued to converge and converge and converge. So the skill set just ended up being cumulative, if that makes sense.
Is it more just like, now I guess I am doing that? Is that what?
Yeah, I am doing that. I am, interviewing product people, writing product specs. I'm leaning in when there is no product person. Oh, goodness gracious, turn around. I'm managing a bunch of PMs and I understand exactly what they do. And I'm in their JIRA tickets and rewriting them. And,
So what point of your career was that? Was that at Google or was that before? Because it was kind of like you went, so you went from, there was Nokia before Google, like Nokia was the Google before Google.
Yeah, so it was definitely not at Nokia or Google because by the time I joined Google, it was just under 20,000 employees. I think it was my entry class into the company that brought it just over 18,000, if I remember correctly. Somebody will be listening to this and be like, no, it wasn't. So no, it wasn't at Nokia or Google. They were larger organizations where the roles were much more clear. But when I worked at agency, it definitely wasn't clear cut, right? So at agencies, you wore multiple hats and you did whatever the project needed you to do.
It's interesting. So I think if you look at people now, like the product path is clearer and it's
Mm,
more attractive. And I think
mm,
that as we were going through our careers, like I remember discovering the concept of product
yeah,
management when I was at Google in 2006, 7, 8,
yeah,
thereabouts. I sort of discovered what product management was. I
mm,
was like, that sounds like the kind of thing that I like doing. Why am I not doing that? Um, and trying to go into it, but it was not a known career path, really. It wasn't
mm.
anything that was sort of clear. I think these days people are much more like, I'd like to be a product manager, and
Yes,
I'd like to be a
yeah,
CPO, I'd like to be a
absolutely.
product leader, I'd like to be a CEO. And
Yes,
especially in startup world, it's like,
yes.
that's the
Yeah,
nature
it's
of the
much
founding.
more clear as a career path, as a progression, and knowing almost like what kind of undergraduate degree you would want to have to be able to get in there. There's not an undergraduate degree in product management, but you might go through computer science and human and computer and you might do those things. But I also think that the entire field continues to evolve, right? So I came out of university, what was it, 1994, with my undergraduate. Like the internet was barely existing.
Yeah, exactly. Um, speaking of the change, do you remember, like, because obviously coming from psychology and social work, and then
Mm,
you computer science and human computer interaction, but then you had business analyst type
mhm,
role.
mhm.
Where did you sort of pick up the business thinking from? Like, was there a moment where you sort of like go, oh, this is a new area for me?
I think it was definitely on the job. It was about reading. It was about educating myself. I never did an MBA or a business degree. I also come from a family of accountants, and I do mean a family of accountants. My mother, my sister, my grandmother.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This is one of the things that I've noticed with people, particularly from a design background, that it's or a user experience
Hmm.
background, is it's often like there's a very big focus on making the users happy
Mm,
and making things that are beautiful, like, or what
hmm.
functional and all that
Yeah,
sort of stuff. But then, does it actually have value? Seems to be
yeah,
a question that is often
absolutely,
neglected from the background.
absolutely.
Was there a moment where you sort of like had the first time you had to make that trade off? Is that something that?
I think, yeah, I remember, and it was not actually in a product role. It goes back, I'm sure it happened before, but the one that I remember most is because it's fun and it's funny and it was done with kindness and generosity. And it was a Google. It was with the AdSense team, and I kept on pushing for a particular thing to be changed. And it was hard coded, and it was going to be really hard to change because it was still in the old code of AdSense, and it wasn't something that could be swapped out. And it had a real user impact. People hated it. So the thing was that calculations for how much you had earned from the ads that were surfaced on your website was reset at midnight Mountain View time across the globe.
So one of the things that you sort of mentioned, we were going through the career just there before,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we kind of you'd gone through into I think the Google sort of phase where you
Mm-hmm.
become a product person, but not we didn't really talk much about
Mm-hmm.
like going to management and going into the
Yeah,
executive leadership and CPO type roles.
yeah.
I'd love to just cover a bit of that, like just the experience of like
Mm-hmm.
what happened, and then we can talk about like what those transitions were like, because I think
Yeah.
they'll be interesting.
I think I've gone back and forth, and I still sometimes feel this, and I've taken a lot of coaching and a lot of mentorship, that as a manager of managers sometimes, like the largest team I've ever managed was just over 120. So you're managing managers who manage people. I mean, by 120, your org has multiple layers. I don't, I sometimes really feel that I don't do anything. There's no, gosh, what words to use? There's no artifact to show for it. I did not create a roadmap or a bunch of Jira tickets, or again, maybe not Jira, maybe KiteMaker or Linear or whatever, right? Whatever tool you're using. I don't have wireframes. I don't have designs. I didn't produce anything. And I still sometimes struggle with that, and make really silly jokes about it because it makes me feel better. And I struggled with that throughout my career. So every time I would go into management, I would have these moments of existential angst about not producing anything, and had a real problem with that. And it took an intervention, not an intervention, but a really good, deep conversation with someone who was my manager, who said, "You're really good at empowering and enabling other people, at getting barriers out of the way, at getting them to think practically and to execute and to get them out of that I'm stuck zone. Why don't you embrace that skill as an actual skill instead of constantly thinking that you're not contributing anything or not doing anything?" And it was a hard conversation for me. but it made me realize that maybe one of the skills that I was good at and I did have is that skill set that he had described, which does not produce an artifact at the end, but it helps other people produce their artifact at the end. It was hard. It's still hard for me sometimes, and
Was
I've
that
been doing
something
it a
that
long time.
was that something that was there the moment where you had that conversation? Could you just talk us through what was happening? Like, was there a crisis? Was there some sort of burnout? Were you struggling with something, or how did that conversation come out?
I was at Google. It was again, I was managing the emerging markets research team, which was relatively small but covered an enormous amount of scope. Um, my team had gotten big enough where I had almost no time to do hands-on work, and I was struggling with that. And that's why that conversation took place, because I went to my manager just going, and I don't have any time to. And he's like, hey, here is the value you are bringing. And it had been because I was talking to him about, like, maybe I just give up this role and I go back to, an IC role. And I had done that multiple times in my career where I would give up management and go into an IC role. Give up management, go into an IC role. And I had done that, again, nonlinear, bouncing back and forth a couple of times. And for some reason would keep on being pulled back into management because I would end up taking those responsibilities anyway.
Yeah, interesting. So that was sort of pushed you into management, but then you also had the stress about, but I'm not actually doing anything. And was there obviously he's explained to you about how that's valuable. How have you managed to solve that challenge of, like, being able to measure or perceive or value the value, if you like, that you create? Because that, like, often we have that background of, like, I've created the design, I've created a product. Like, this is my product, this is my document, my roadmap. Whereas I've got a team of 7 people who have created roadmaps and who have created products, and I have not done any of them.
Haven't done shit at all.
Yeah. How did you manage to sort of, like, connect the dots and feel like, okay, well.
Yeah, you get more and more abstraction. I don't know. To be honest, I don't have a legitimate answer for that question, and I think it is a really big question, and I do it on a daily basis. I remind myself that I've empowered this person, I've helped this person, clear this hurdle for themselves or their team. I've helped the management team make these strategic decisions, which will lead to this kind of value for the company. I try and actually package it in my own brain as artifacts almost. I don't have a solution for that. I do actively do some sort of internal talking to myself to remind myself that these are valuable, because it's not an on-off switch for me. It's just a continuous process of saying, I am doing something valuable. In smaller companies, I do get the brilliant opportunity of doing more hands-on work, and I love it. At larger companies, do slides count as hands-on work?
Yeah, sometimes it's like
slides for the board.
So do you find then there's a disconnect between how you naturally perceive the value you create in these situations, that challenge, and what other people perceive in terms of your colleagues and peers? And so, because a lot of people struggle sometimes to, present their successes, but it almost seems like you have that challenge, but then also people have got the opposite view of you, so they have to remind you of what your successes are.
Yes, constant. Yes. So again, I make lots of silly, sarcastic jokes about it to make myself feel better. I remember many years ago when I had to take my Swedish driver's license schooling and exam, because I had an American driver's license, which is no good here. And it's quite a difficult program here, quite intense. Like, you drive on ice. I think it's one of the world's hardest driving, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I have one now. I'm very pleased. But I remember taking that course and being in a room. It was the English speaking version. So I was in a room of all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of countries. And we're all internationals. And so we're taking the English language one, right? And everyone's going around the room introducing themselves. I'm a nurse, I'm a chef, I'm a blah, and they all have really understandable careers. And I'm somewhere in the middle of this circle of about 20 people, and I'm like stressing out. I'm like, how do I explain UX, product, tech? Like, what do I say? I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a baker, I'm not a chef. Like, I was sitting there like twitching inside. And it gets to my turn and I say, I work in tech, I'm a manager, I don't really do anything. And thank you, because that's the response I got. And everyone was really friendly and really lovely after that. But I could not find in that group of international people with what I would, again, this is me and my bias and my insecurity, term real jobs, I couldn't think of how I was going to present myself.
That's really interesting because, like, the thing is that when you have good leaders and good managers, they have such a massive impact on the organization and such a massive benefit and create so much value by affecting other people. And it's partly that coaching, partly that leadership, and sort of directing and taking decisions and structuring the way decisions happen, and making collaboration happen
and
and
that
stuff
is real
like that.
value. And I think if you asked my teams, they'd tell you I did a decent job of it, or at least that's what they tell me to my face. I don't know what they say behind
Yeah.
It's hard to perceive that value, I think, when you're in it day in, or at least it is for me. And again, that's my insecurities, my biases, my sort of imposter syndrome writ large.
You went from sort of like running a team at Google, and you said you became a chief product officer at some stage. So sort of like this jump from like managing a team, maybe with one layer of managers, but within a large organization, to suddenly being in a executive kind of role. Was that like often when people do that, it's like, I really, really want to get to executive role. I really want to be a CEO. I want to be a C something or something like that. At the same time, it's a big challenge, a big change.
It is.
And there's also fear of like, can I even do this?
Yeah.
How is that experience for you the first time you sort of stepped into that?
Again, it was really organic. An opportunity presented itself. I thought, I can do this with a little bit of support and learning. I can do this. And at the Trinity Mirror Group, I had a great mentor and manager who was the group chief digital officer for all of Trinity Mirror's groups, everything. And he was great, and he supported that. And again, super organic. And there was no one thing that I had to learn. There was a lot of things that I had to upskill in and understand and challenge myself to understand. And you do it like you would do anything else. So I think that transition is, in terms of what I needed to do for myself, is very similar to any transition I have made. Even when I was in IC, going from IC to a senior IC or a principal IC, there are skills that you need to acquire and fine tune. And you do that through mentorship, and you do that by working with really smart people who already have those skills and mirroring those skills and having those conversations. You read, you educate, you do what you need to do to upskill yourself.
Did you ever go into a position where it was like there's a bigger gap than you expected, or than you were worried about the size of the gap?
I was hired with a tiny team, and actually one of the original teammates had posted a photo of like the 5 of us. 6 months later, we were over 50. And a year later, we were over 120. And that was partially hiring and partially consolidating a company that had very sort of desperate organizations and inheriting folks from other organizations, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. How do you go about getting, approaching mentors, approaching people for support? This is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, because partly with the pride, right? Or feeling like I should know this stuff or whatever. But I mean, what's your general approach when you have someone senior, especially your manager,
Yeah, interestingly, I have more of that problem on the personal side of things than on the professional side of things. I think because we work in such a technical field, I cannot be the machine learning expert, the design expert, the UX expert, the product expert, the business expert, the accounting expert. I cannot. It would be idiotic for me to assume I can deep dive into all of these super knowledgeable fields where people have spent years learning and perfecting them. And so, interestingly enough, knowing that, I have no problem going to my head of ML right now and going, Anjad, explain this to me like I'm a 3-year-old. And he's really cool about it. He's amazing about it. Or, going to our head of structuring, our loan expert, Andreas, and being like, okay, dude, you just said all these things. I'm not a banker. I'm not, a financial expert who understands how to structure loans. I literally, please, use English. And they're super wonderful about it. They don't look at me like I'm an idiot. They just say, okay, yeah, I get it, because I've spent, 20 years of my career learning this stuff. So I get that you don't get it.
Yeah. Well, do you have the same, what about this is all technical and business domain expertise. What about things like when you're going from that managing 6 or 10 people or 16 people to 80 or 120 or whatever it is.
Yep.
Those challenges are different kinds of challenges because they're the management challenges or leadership challenges as opposed to
that's true. And it can be
domain.
more embarrassing task for support in those. And you're right, I probably do have more of a let me see if I can figure this out myself kind of thing, because that feels more personal, right? It's not like a domain expert. Again, I have been extraordinarily lucky. I'm touching wood as I say that, because I had great managers and mentors who made it really okay. I've had several who were like, if I were you, I might try these things, which, by the way, is a refrain I have now adopted when I'm mentoring and managing. I remember one boss, just wonderful, super intelligent human being. He was a fixer. And so I'd have to go into meetings going, this is not for you to fix. This is for us to discuss so you can give me ideas. And he'd be like, okay. Because otherwise he'd go and try and fix it out of like the goodness of his own heart, basically. But again, by being able to understand that about him and myself, I could go into those conversations and say, hey, boss, this is not for you to fix, but can we troubleshoot and can you help me think of ideas of what I can do different?
Right, so sort of setting it up as a coaching conversation, as opposed to I don't know,
fix it. Go fix this for me now.
I mean, that's useful. I think that's a useful tactic, useful sort of like approach for getting people to help in a way that develops you, right? Because it's like you're causing him to go into coaching mode. Some people I've worked with, some clients that I've worked with, often that doesn't happen because people are in this defensive mode of or functional focus, as in they're trying to defend their function and defend their team. Do you have been in environments where it's been more like that, and or has it changed, or has it always been collaborative, collegial?
Okay, no one is that lucky, including myself. So I have been, and I would, for the reasons of making nobody look like a bad person, will not name names or companies, but absolutely yes. I find it really difficult to navigate those environments. I do sometimes think that I'm a little bit naive in terms of thinking everyone's got the best intentions and the best, but you do have to build the skills when you realize that maybe that person is in a really bad place right now, and that's not how they're behaving, and that's not how they're executing their role.
So what did you do differently in that situation when you discovered that?
I'm still challenged by this, to be very honest. So I worked with the coach that I had at the time to develop a bit of a thinking strategy around that. So first of all, I have learned that this is not personal, and you have to understand that that person is not trying to be evil to anybody, especially not you, because it can be quite tough to not take it personally. But again, I've had to develop that thinking strategy. I think, again, this is if we can bring that right back to product, we need to always choose the battles we're going to fight. And that's a horrible negative way of phrasing it, because it's not a battle and it's not a fight and this is not war. How about we always have to choose the things that we will invest energy and time in, because we can only do so many things at once.
This goes along for relationships.
Yes, I do think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I presume there's been situations here where you've worked with someone who's been a bit challenging like that, and then managed, not necessarily through your own magic, but you've been part of the process that has turned that relationship around a bit. And then you've been some situations, by the sounds of things, where it hasn't worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you talk us through examples of both of those?
Sure. So let's take the, I guess, more quote unquote negative one where that just didn't work. I worked with a VP of engineering who fundamentally didn't want to hear about product, UX, or design. Didn't give a flying you-know-what. Look at me avoiding swearing again. And when I remember leaving, and he'd stayed at the organization for another year, again, no names will be mentioned. And his parting words to me were, "It's been really nice working with you, Lidia. I still don't know what the hell you do." I was like, okay.
Yeah. What would be the signals that you figured out that's, how do we learn from this? Like, how do we take this and go, because I know there are people who have these tough relationships. Like, at what point do you look at this now and say?
So I'll give you a really concrete example, because I think about 4 or 5 months in, we were sitting at a sort of senior management planning session, like an all-day offsite. And anytime I brought something up, he would speak over me and interrupt. I was also the only woman in that room, except for the assistant to the group. And I remember one of the other men in the room turning to me and going, "Does he always do this to you?" That should have been a wake-up call. And instead I brushed it aside and I made it into a joke. And I was like, oh, no, it's fine. We're just debating. We're not. He wasn't listening. And so I could have actually really decreased my efforts at that point and been like, this is someone that's just not going to come on side, not going to, and I need to find other ways. And I didn't. I invested at least another year after that. But I really remember that concrete moment because I'd never had a colleague turn around and go, what? In a situation like that before. I was like, I don't know.
Is this a situation where with hindsight, you would have thought that maybe the manager of this, the next level up?
So we had the same manager, and my manager was great and really did coach and really did try and help me understand how to cope with that and how to work around it and how to communicate. And it was really my manager that said, look, why are you investing? Why do you keep on investing in this? You're doing a really great job on that team that he manages. Why are, because you found all these ways, like, why are you investing emotionally? Because in the defense of this engineering VP, he did a great job managing his organization, his engineering organization. Really great job. They were super productive and super smart. So
this is just a matter of you adapting to how to work with him and just like, okay, well, you kind of work like this. It's not necessarily causing a much problem apart from my emotional.
It didn't cause just me. It caused every UX designer and product analyst that worked with him lots and lots of anxiety. Because again, he was really dismissive of their expertise and their skill sets. But his people weren't, for the most part. And so just work with his people, right?
Right, interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so again, if you can't, but there are situations where you're not going to be able to find those workarounds. Yeah. But I think, again, bringing it back to ways of working in product, we find the things that we should invest time in. And maybe that is a piece that you cannot currently invest time in. Because there's only so much time and energy and effort and skill that you can give to something. And I think it's okay to say, there's this bit over here on the left side in this little corner that I'm just not going to touch for a while. Maybe I'll revisit it in a little bit.
Do you have a way of saying, this is something that it's okay, no, this is something I must fix, this is something that's okay to leave, and this is something that's a problem that I can't fix, that means that I need to go leave?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think I'm a little slow in realizing that last category.
Yeah. Was this one that you would, with hindsight, look back and go, I should have left earlier because it just wasn't going to solve itself?
I don't think I should have left the organization. The other people I worked with were great.
Yeah.
But I think I should have left that problem on the table.
I do find it can be hard for a lot of people, me included, to not to leave things that are not, that don't feel right, like especially when you feel like someone else needs to change. And there's this theory of like I can only change me and how I react to things, and I can't change everyone else. So some things and it's the same as a parent when you're parenting, right? You've got kids who are like, okay, they kind of do this, and some of these things I can influence and change, but all I can really do is focus on me. And with my kids, I'm always like helping them to understand they can only focus on them. Yeah. So son, you can't. My daughter, I can't get her. I have to teach her that she can't control my son, and vice versa. At the same time, it's like a real tough.
Yes. So as a social worker, I worked in drug addiction for a while, and there's the serenity prayer, right? God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Whether or not you are faith-based and believe in God or not, you could say that prayer with or without the word God in it. I use that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship and coaching and us to help help find that, because when you get out of your own head, like someone else's situation, you could look at this and go, well, that's just let that.
I think it's useful in everyday life. I mean, right now we're faced with a really interesting socio-political situation in the world. I stopped reading the news on a daily basis. I'm the least informed I've ever been in my adult life because I find it too stressful these days, both as an American and as a Ukrainian. Yeah. Okay, can't consume the news today. But it's that prayer again. I have to accept the things I cannot change and have the courage to change the things that I can. And I have to have the wisdom to know the difference. So my way of hacking my own psychology is the wisdom is I can't change a lot of these things. And so I have to consume news less often because I find it stressful and I have no way of changing it.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a parallel there with the work environment where there's just a team who's just not functioning the way I want, but it's out of my domain. And I've just got to work on how do I do the best in my
Absolutely.
situation, but at the
Absolutely.
same time collaborate, right? So
Absolutely. And collaborate the best I can.
yeah.
Absolutely. So on a positive side, I had when I was working on the UX and design side, I had a really brilliant, wonderful PM, still a friend, still in touch, who really thought that design and UX was tell them what to do and they'll make it pixel pretty. They'll make it pretty. And it would really upset that design team. And it would really, again, demotivate them. These are skilled professionals who really care about what they produce and why. And I remember sitting, again, no names will be mentioned. And I remember sitting down with him and having a real heart-to-heart and saying, look, when you say XYZ and you do XYZ, this is how it's heard and how it's consumed. He's like, no. And then I gave him an analogy. I said, would you ever come to an engineer and you've written down like a huge spec with if this, then that, you've basically written pseudocode, hand it to him and go, type this out in code. He's like, of course not. Why would you do that? I was like, well, sir, that's how you're treating your designers and your UX researchers and your product analysts. He's like, no, no. And we had this really wonderful heart-to-heart. But using that analogy, because he had come from an engineering background, so he had an enormous amount of knowledge and respect for the difficulty of taking a problem and engineering it into code. And he would never, ever come to a senior engineer going, type this out in code, ever, right? So understanding, yeah, exactly. So understanding that he would come to his designers basically with a hand-drawn wireframe and a bunch of, I just need you to put the brand colors on top of this, was possibly not the way to treat your designers who had like 15, 20 years of experience.
Yeah. I'm very good at putting colors in places, but
yeah, they were fantastic at it. They did amazing work putting colors in places, but that's not right. If he came to them with like, we're trying to create this experience and solve this problem, they would give him infinitely interesting iterations on those solutions and ideas, and he should use them as partners, just like he did his senior engineers and his engineering leaders. But it was great. And actually, he really started working at it. And yeah, I don't know if I wonder, I'm going to have to ask him if he remembers that conversation. I'll ping him. But what I got as feedback from my UX manager on that team was like, she definitely noticed an evolution in that relationship. And she definitely noticed that he was asking more questions and not necessarily dictating solutions. And that was great.
I find that particular challenge is really common in organizations where, especially a strong-minded founder or a CEO or even a product person, product people do this with engineers and with designers. And, people do this because they don't, for various reasons. And it's really hard to help them get beyond it. And because actually it's hard work to really define what problem am I trying to solve.
Yes.
Like it's easy to define a solution that I'd like.
Yes.
That's actually easy. And the hard part is that it is defining it well enough that someone else can actually create more value than I can create.
Yeah, I think one of a really simple and clear and easy hack for that is even if you find it easier to come up with a solution, ask instead of tell. So come to your engineers, your designers, your UXers, your stakeholder partners and say, I've thought we could do it like this. Can I tear this apart for me? I'm thinking of this as a possible solution. I really need you to tear this apart for me. Because in that conversation, those people will feel empowered and you will come up with better solutions together.
I think also what happens with that is people that ask, well, what are you trying to solve? And I find that it's really hard to actually answer that question unless someone's asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, in those conversations and those debates, and even I'm going to use the word argument, but I mean it in a positive sense, like an intellectual argument, you will define the problem better. You will find better solutions for it. So instead of coming into that quote unquote room and saying, here's the solution, come in with that humbleness and say, hey, I'm thinking of this kind of thing as a possible quote unquote solution. I need your brains to tear this to pieces with me. And that automatically is empowering. And that's a really simple hack to that.
That's a really interesting idea. Like, to me, that's obviously something that you can do when you are the person who would be bringing the solution. What do you do when you're in the situation where people are constraining your work or your team's work by telling them what the solution is? Because you kind of mentioned that here already, but I mean, what did you ever have this with other senior managers? Like even in that situation where you're the board, you're in the executive team.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, and someone says,
I challenge them with kindness, right? Like, hey, what is it we're really trying to achieve or solve here? Can you just frame it for me? Let me help you frame it. Because what I'm hearing is, I just want this. But why this? I use that sort of the whys, right? The 5 whys, or is it 6 whys? How many whys is it?
Traditionally 5, but I think more can be better.
6.
Yeah.
I tease, and I have a funny way of phrasing it. I say we're all going to behave like 3-year-olds because 3-year-olds never stop asking why. And anyone who's ever interacted with a 3-year-old, it's exhausting. Why? Why?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I used to limit the number of whys my son could ask in a day. It used to drive him crazy. And I said, let's just keep asking why. And again, if you've got the right group of people with the right kind of sense of humor around you, that could be quite fun.
Yeah.
Just keep asking why. So behave like a 3-year-old.
And then you can do that collaboratively and dig into the issue. I think that those discussions are often really, really fruitful, especially at the executive level, because then you start to really dig into what the real reasons are. And now I understand a lot more about what operations or what finance or sales is concerned about and what's motivating them. And now we can come up with solutions that really work. But also now I can express those whys to my team.
Yeah, I think there's really powerful words just in business in general. Why is one of them. But again, said not with anger, but with kindness. Like, hey, why? Can I help you figure out why? Versus, why are you doing this? And then the words, I don't know, let's figure it out, is the corollary to that. You might ask why, and I'll be like, I have no idea. I have no clue. Maybe. So I think those are really powerful things to say to each other and to your team. And I think you have to embrace that sometimes the answers that come out are really unexpected. And sometimes, especially in early stage companies, like we were talking about, established companies versus early stage companies, the why could be something immensely pragmatic and not terribly motivating. Like, we need to do this to get our next round of funding. The end.
In early stage, it can be pragmatic. Because I when you said that, I was thinking it would be the other way around.
No, I think it can be pragmatic at any stage of company. But sometimes the answer to the why is not like this big North Star goal of changing the world. Sometimes it is very basic pragmatism.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that either. And I do think that people sometimes look for those magic North Star, we're going to motivate everyone with this world-changing thing, and sometimes it's pure pragmatism.
Well, for the pragmatism necessary, I always think that if you can have a great North Star, great vision, and great strategy and everything like that, but if next week you can't pay people and you have no money in the bank, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, even as a really established client, you can say, okay, so or a company, you can say our 12 biggest clients who are worth $2 billion a year to us say that they will stop unless we do X, Y, Z. We're going to drop everything and do X, Y, Z. Whatever X, Y, Z is, or, there's a law that's passed. GDPR was a great example of that in Europe. Sorry, got to do it. Is it motivating? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But you got to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So sometimes the why is purely pragmatic and not like world domination changing. And that's okay too.
Yeah, interesting. And do you find, you mentioned about the difference between startups and corporates, because you've gone from big tech to, to Nokia and Google to small tech to sort of like traditional publishing to startups and all sorts of backwards and forwards. What's your takeaway from all this? Like, what's your sort of like, what's the big difference and why is one better than the other? Or what do you like places?
Yeah. Can I answer it first with a joke just to make myself feel better? The only reason is because I've been doing this for a while and I'm just getting seriously old. Thank you. That makes me feel better. Now I have bought myself some time to think through that answer. I think I have a tendency to find pockets even in large organizations that are about innovation or change or something that is not the core product. So, emerging markets at Google, markets business unit at Spotify, which launched Spotify Lite and Spotify India. So that's not necessarily the core thing, right?
Right. So you're often in the innovation.
It's a little pocket of can we call it weirdness? But I mean weirdness in a really positive way. And again, same thing with Google. I was with AdSense, which was very established, but I was with them for a year, and the remaining years of Google was with emerging markets, which again was not core product. In fact, I think all of the products we launched no longer exist. The learning went into other core products, but we launched a bunch of products no one would, in the main markets of Google would have ever heard about. So I think some of that is really motivating, and if I can find that in a large organization, thumbs up. But that's more common, I guess, or more standardized in a evolving startup, whether that's Series A or Series D, because you're still, sort of in that innovation chaos. Can we call it that? Ooh, let's make that a quote. I like that one. I'm going to stick with it. I think that's what I find really motivating. I like that creative innovation chaos, and I like being able to apply that little bit. Can we use the word process? But maybe it's not process, that little bit of thinking around it to really harness it and get it somewhere interesting. And I think that might be a red thread. But again, I'm giving you this red thread with hindsight. So when I look at my own LinkedIn and my own CV and I try and compose a narrative, I'm like, oh, that's something that has consistently come with me.
Even like one place that stands out to me as being possibly different is the chief product officer at Trinity Mirror, because that's like your part of the main business.
You are, but they were going through quite a bit of change and innovation around how they did things, and we're trying to launch several new products, because again, there's been so much disruption in the newsroom, even back then, right?
Oh, yeah. This was 2017, so yes, definitely.
Yeah. So even then, there was quite a bit of disruption. They had brought in this wonderful human as chief digital officer for the group, and he was really trying to drive change and be much more data-centered, much more innovation-centered. He even created sort of an internal, almost VC arm in there to try and get products out. So even then, and again, with hindsight, I can give you this red thread. What I really want to stress to folks listening to this conversation is I can find these red threads now, looking backwards. I don't think I would have identified this as a motivator or a red thread in the moment. It's taken me quite a bit of time in my life to realize oh, I am drawn to these things.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I guess because in those situations as well, you might be doing a lot of the change, but then around you there's less openness to change. Whereas if you're in there's interesting, I guess when you're in a big organization and you're in that pocket of innovation,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You're surrounded by people who are less open to change. Whereas in a startup, kind of everyone's in the same boat. Is there a difference?
I think there is. I think in the startup there is more acceptance or acknowledgement that you're all in this boat of trying to figure it out, the creative innovation chaos. I think in large organizations, especially when you are being brought in as the agent of that change, there's some folks are just why are we even doing this? It's not even, again, it's not resistance at the level of oh, I hate this. It's more things work.
Yeah.
So
innovators dilemma.
Yeah, exactly. And better people have written better books than I will ever write on this problem.
Is it one of the things that I was thinking here is that in some ways when you are the agent of change, or you're in that, you're sort of leading that pocket of weirdness, if you like, where there's ambiguity and where we're still figuring it out. Do you find that people assume that your lack of having figured it out might be because of you, as opposed to because it's an ambiguous area, whereas their area is less? Is that a challenge? When you're, do you know what I mean here? Yeah, but is that a challenge?
I think it can be, and again, I think it depends. Right back to over-indexing on people. I think it depends so much on the personalities of the people that you're working with, but also how that's been set up in the organization. I mean, one of the things that I have experienced is you're going through a transformation in an existing company, and at the board and sort of corporate level, there's a lot of verbiage around that being the way that things need to go. But on the ground, there's not a lot of acceptance or support. And you have to, again, negotiate and prioritize your way out of that. Because I do think change is really hard for people. And I think as a species, we really like to find patterns for ourselves, and we stick to those patterns. You walk to work the same way every day. Yeah. My son seems to have the same thing for breakfast every morning.
I wish my kids did.
Want to trade? I'm getting a little concerned. I think he's going to turn into a bagel any day now. But you know what I mean? We do have a
Yeah.
tendency to find our comfy spot.
Mm.
And,
Yeah, so when you're in those situations where you are the agent of change and that discomfort is focused around you, is there a difference in the way you work with that, or have you examples of where you've done that?
yeah, multiple examples. I think the way that I approach it is again with humanity and understanding where that person is coming from. Also, they've run some sort of successful business to a point, and now that success has kind of tapered, and that's why there's this need for change. So really trying to work with them to understand why things have worked previously, what's really worked previously, again, the why questions, and bringing them on that journey with me to make sure that they feel as emboldened and as in control of the change that is going to happen as I possibly can make them.
That's really interesting because you're the agent of change, yet what you're trying to do is discover their existing, what's happened, the background, and then bring them in to give them control over the change. Is that
If you
right? Is that what
think,
you think?
yeah, or at least as much as I possibly can, right? Like if you think about going into a company that's going through a digital transformation or any kind of transformation and you're being brought in as part of that, gung-ho tech crew or whatever, you've got an organization that may have existed for 100 years and has done really well. It would be really, really arrogant to come in there and go, well, you don't know what you're doing. Well, obviously they know what they're doing. They've existed for X number of years without you. So understanding what do they know? What do they understand? Where are their challenges coming from externally and internally? Where can you lean in with them and be like, hey, maybe we can try this different thing and it will have a better outcome? Versus coming in there and dismissing everything they've done as stupid.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when you say it like that, it feels really, really obvious. But I've seen so many tech and product leaders and change leaders and transformation type people coming into more traditional organizations as the hero in shining armor, trying to fix everything, and they wouldn't perceive themselves as arrogant, but at the same time, that's the pattern that you see often.
Okay. I would love folks to just take a step back and realize any organization you come into, no matter how much it's struggling now, may have been successful 10 years ago. And something made them successful. There is knowledge in that organization and in those people that is worthwhile and meaningful, and you should really know what it is. Because it will empower you to make better, more intelligent change decisions.
I'm reminded of Dolly Parton.
Thank you.
Because she had this quote, which is basically find out who you are and do it on purpose. And I think of this in particular in relation to change in successful organizations, but even like very personal, my own strategy, my own business. It's really about finding out who you are. So when you come and join a new organization that has a 100-year history, finding out who they really are, what the strengths really are, and what worked, what didn't, and why did it work,
and why isn't it working anymore? Because it's such a complex thing. And again, you're not going to have the domain knowledge of some of those folks. You can't. So you're going to learn from them and they're going to learn from you. And I find it, and maybe it's not that different. Any organization I join, it's going to be an organization that has some knowledge in it. Even if it's literally a seed stage and I'm sitting on their board or whatever, like they have knowledge I don't have. And I want some of that knowledge and they want some of my knowledge. So if we can make it an exchange of equals and intelligent people instead of somebody thinking like, I'm better than you are, I think maybe this is where, again, my over-indexing on humans and my own insecurities play in my favor. I never walk into a room thinking I'm the smartest person in the room, quite the opposite. I usually walk in a room going, hi, I'm here. But I think it works for me because then I'm willing to listen to that other person's expertise. And maybe I hope they look at me and say, well, she must know something and she's not trying to, push something down my throat or sell me something. So I will listen to her. I hope. Yeah. I don't know.
I think realistically, from the outside, you're perceived as one of the smartest people in the room. But I mean, it's just, right.
And they're going to be disappointed.
But they can go, yeah. So don't over-index on the humility there. But I mean, at the same time, the attitude of like learning from people is really valuable, I think.
Yeah. But I think that everything and everyone has something they can teach us or point out to us. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that the whole point of having a conversation? And I
It
really
makes a
love
massive
that.
difference.
Yeah, it makes a
Yeah.
huge difference. And again, I'm not an expert in everything.
I find, I'm going to say, at the executive level, that particular attitude is the kind of thing that generates change throughout the organization.
I hope so.
It does. And this is one of the values that someone like you brings to an organization, that you come in and causes these collaborations and this disarming, and then people get a bit more open-minded, and they learn across functions and now the teams, and this flows down through the organization.
I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope so, because I find that immensely powerful and wonderful. And I love being dumb and learning stuff and feeling a little smarter at the end of it. Because the world is a complex, bizarre place, and there's just, oh my gosh, like there's just no way of knowing it all. There's just none. And I don't want to either. Like, imagine the pollution in your brain. I would rather say, like, this person is the expert, and I'm going to talk to them, and they're going to teach me lots of stuff, and I can always refer to them because they're the expert.
Coming up towards the end of our conversation, but I wanted to touch back on something you alluded to earlier, which is the role of gender in your career and what's happened. Because you told some interesting stories about your time at some companies before we were planning.
Yeah.
I just want to open that door and just like what's on your mind, and how do we think about this, and thinking in particular of the women listening, what can they learn or expect if they go into these roles, and then what can men think about?
For the men, please be our friends and our advocates, because it's an uphill battle. I've talked to so many other senior women leaders in the last few months because we feel like things are sliding backwards at such an alarming rate given what's going on in the world. And it can be personally devastating. Also, I feel such immense gratitude to all the women who came before me, who fought for the right for me to be in those roles. And I talked to my son about this quite a bit. Like 100 years ago, I couldn't have the roles I have. There were no roles for women like that. It was literally a handful of women that were allowed to run business, had the opportunity to run businesses or be executives in their own right. It was such an anomaly. It's still an anomaly. I said this on stage a few years ago, and I really fundamentally believe it. I would love to sometime in my lifetime, and it might never happen, to be in a situation where someone's gender or gender identity does not somehow dictate the roles that they're given as options to pursue. So if my son decides he wants to be a primary school teacher, it's not weird because he's a boy. And if your daughter decides to be an astrophysicist, it's not weird because she's a girl. I would love.
I would say, by the way, that neither of those things seem weird to me. I don't know whether I'm weird, but when I was growing up, being a teacher was like plenty of male teachers in primary school, and
not in primary school,
and it was in my list of things that I'd like to. I considered as a career.
That's awesome.
Myself, yeah.
On the other hand, I've worked in tech my entire life, and I'm often the only woman in a room. That's weird.
What's the difference in experience when you're the only woman compared to where you are in a situation where you're in an equal or majority?
It's so different. The conversations you have are so different. The chit chat before a meeting is so different. The kinds of things that are brought up are so different. I can give a really concrete example. I was on a management team that was pretty much 50-50, male, female. I remember having a conversation about perimenopause as chit-chat before the meeting kicked off.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned a situation with a man who was talking over you, right? An engineering leader. Is that something that happens less frequently now? Or because, particularly think about being in those senior management meetings, right? Where you've kind of got a lot of, ego in the room frequently. And often that's combined with testosterone if there's, right, for historical and whatever reasons. But I mean, and that whole Zuckerberg's masculine energy sort of thing.
Oh, dude,
and all that stuff. Okay, I'll get you started on that. But what I want to talk about is your experience of this, of being in those rooms where it's like, is this a gender thing, or is this just because you're like that, or you like that to everyone, or is that because I'm a woman?
I got shushed in a senior meeting once.
Oh, really?
Again, I was one of two women in the room, and one of the other executives shushed me when I was asking a question. He literally turned around and went, shh. He was a client, so I had to handle it with humor. But I remember walking out of that room, and my team that was with me, like the other executives in the room that were with me, one was a woman, two were men, and all four of us looked at each other, and the men were really wonderful, and they asked, what could we have done to support you in that? And because this was a client, I said, I'm not sure you could have done anything, because we don't want to lose this client. This is one of our biggest clients. But we had a really honest conversation about how do we support each other when things like that happen, which means that the men were advocates.
All right, excellent. Well, look, thanks for the conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like I've learned a lot about you and what you do and how you think about
We've
things.
been friends for years.
Yeah. So just at the end, how can people find you? What are you up to now? How can people find you? How can they work with you?
Yeah. So I have no social media presence except for LinkedIn by very, very active choice. That's not true. I also use WhatsApp, and I'm in a couple of groups on WhatsApp. But they can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I work for a great fintech startup here in Stockholm called Gillian. They should definitely look it up. It's awesome.
Excellent. Well, and just crazy question. Are you hiring at the moment in your organization?
We definitely need some back-end engineers, and I think those roles are posted.
Oh, there you go. Excellent.
But definitely in Stockholm, though.
So okay.
We're quite small. Series A.
We're
small.
Yes. Excellent. All right. Well, look, thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me.
For the chat. It's been a pleasure. And we will see you again soon.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.